During the volatile Cold War years, as ideological rifts deepened between East and West, a shadowy Italian Masonic Lodge, known as Propaganda Due, or P2, extended its web far beyond the borders of Italy. Officially banned by the Grand Orient of Italy in 1976, P2 continued to operate as a clandestine organization with the apparent intent of subverting democracy in favor of authoritarian regimes that aligned with its ultra-right-wing ideology. Led by the enigmatic financier and former fascist Licio Gelli, P2 became a symbol of deep state manipulation and covert power. While most investigations into P2 focus on its interference within Italian institutions, such as the judiciary, military, press, and even the Vatican, growing evidence and allegations suggest that its reach extended well into Latin America. Here, under the guise of anti-communist collaboration, P2 is believed to have played a significant role in supporting military dictatorships, coordinating repression, and enabling state terror from Argentina to Chile and beyond. The center of P2's Latin American activities appears to have been Argentina. Licio Gelli, known as the Puppet Master, had forged deep connections with the Argentine military establishment long before the military junta seized power in 1976. These relationships were not coincidental. Gelli served as a cultural attaché at the Argentine embassy in Rome and had cultivated relationships with figures such as General Guillermo Suárez Mason, one of the masterminds behind Argentina's dirty war. P2 reportedly helped to broker arms deals and serve as a liaison between European and Latin American fascist elements. Under Gelli's orchestration, Argentina became a staging ground for covert operations and intelligence-sharing arrangements that bore a striking resemblance to Operation Gladio in Europe. NATO's secret stay-behind networks intended to resist Soviet incursion, but often accused of facilitating terrorism and political manipulation in the name of anti-communism. In Argentina, these efforts translated into brutal repression, including disappearances, torture, and extrajudicial killings of tens of thousands, deemed subversives. A particularly compelling case of P2's influence is revealed through its connection to Operation Condor, a coordinated campaign of intelligence and repression among South American dictatorships in the 1970s and 1980s. Countries such as Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia were all involved in this clandestine network, which facilitated cross-border assassinations and the exchange of political prisoners. While Operation Condor was primarily a creation of the South American military elite, with tacit approval and material support from the CIA, P2's alleged role was in facilitating high-level coordination and acting as a broker between military intelligence operatives and European far-right sympathizers. Documents discovered during the Italian investigations into P2, particularly the infamous Lista di Gelli, found in 1981, show names of several Latin American figures, suggesting that P2 had indeed built a transcontinental network of loyalists. Furthermore, many of the Latin American generals and intelligence chiefs were known to frequent Rome, often under mysterious circumstances, where they were reportedly briefed by or met with P2 members. Chile, under General Augusto Pinochet, also became a focal point for this secretive collaboration. Though Pinochet's rise to power in the 1973 coup that deposed Salvador Allende was primarily facilitated by domestic forces and U.S. support, P2's alleged involvement came later, particularly in the consolidation of authoritarian control and the construction of an efficient, technocratic police state. Gelli maintained close ties with Manuel Contreras, the head of Chile's National Intelligence Directorate, DINA, which was the engine of internal repression and a key player in Operation Condor. Italian journalists and prosecutors have pointed to circumstantial evidence, including financial trails, travel records, and overlapping agendas, that suggest P2 was not only advising, but also potentially financing aspects of DINA's operations. These included surveillance, psychological warfare, and propaganda campaigns aimed at discrediting exiled Chilean dissidents abroad, especially in Europe. Brazil, too, found itself within the orbit of P2 influence during its military dictatorship from 1964 to 1985. While Brazil was somewhat more autonomous in its security doctrine, it shared with other regional regimes a fierce anti-communist ideology and a penchant for clandestine alliances. Brazil's intelligence service, the Serviço Nacional de Informações, SNI, is believed to have exchanged information with P2-linked operatives. In return, Brazil provided a safe haven for Italian neo-fascists fleeing justice, some of whom later became mercenaries or trainers in other Latin American states. Reports also suggest that Brazilian corporations may have facilitated money laundering operations for P2's financial schemes, involving fake bank accounts, shell companies, and secret offshore funds, a critical pillar of the organization's international reach. One cannot overlook the Vatican's role as a conduit between P2 and Latin American authoritarian regimes. The Catholic Church, particularly through its conservative wing, was deeply involved in Cold War politics, fearing the spread of liberation theology and leftist insurgencies in Latin America. P2 members held prominent positions within the Vatican's banking and diplomatic apparatus. The Banco Ambrosiano scandal of the early 1980s, which culminated in the mysterious death of banker Roberto Calvi, found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London, revealed deep ties between P2, the Vatican Bank, and Latin American regimes. Funds allegedly siphoned through the Vatican Bank were redirected towards supporting right-wing causes, financing arms deals, and even funding paramilitary squads. The murder of Pope John Paul III in 1978, although still officially attributed to natural causes, has long been suspected by conspiracy theorists to be linked to his intent to purge the Vatican of corrupt financial elements, many of whom were P2 affiliates. Paraguay and Bolivia, often overshadowed in discussions of Cold War politics, were also deeply implicated in the P2 network. In Paraguay, the long-standing dictatorship of Alfredo Stroessner cooperated closely with Operation Condor and received logistical support that some claim had P2 fingerprints. In Bolivia, the short but brutal rule of Luis Garcia Mesa, 1980 to 1981, provides one of the most direct connections to P2. Garcia Mesa's regime, known for its involvement in cocaine trafficking and political repression, was supported by Klaus Barbie, infamously known as the Butcher of Lion and a Nazi war criminal, who had found refuge in Bolivia. Barbie served as a link between Bolivian intelligence and European fascist networks, which included P2. Reports indicate that Licio Gelli was directly involved in advising Garcia Mesa's government and may have played a role in the infamous cocaine coup, where military force and narcotics money combined to seize power in the name of anti-communism. The legacy of P2 in Latin America is not merely one of covert influence, but of enabling systemic terror. By forging relationships with military elites, intelligence agencies, and even religious institutions, P2 functioned as a ghostly international order, sustaining regimes that left hundreds of thousands dead or disappeared. Its ideological justification rested on the fight against communism, but in practice, P2 helped install or maintain regimes marked by censorship, torture, and economic exploitation. Many of the human rights violations that occurred under these regimes have since been documented, tried, and condemned. However, the role of international actors like P2 remains largely in the shadows, thanks to destroyed records, diplomatic immunity, and a lack of coordinated international investigations. Despite its dissolution in the early 1980s and widespread public outrage, the full extent of P2's activities in Latin America is still unknown. Much of the evidence remains circumstantial or buried in redacted archives. Yet the mosaic that emerges from journalistic investigations, declassified intelligence files, and testimonies from former operatives paints a chilling portrait of a secretive elite determined to remake the world in its image, authoritarian, hierarchical, and intolerant of dissent. As Latin America continues to wrestle with the legacies of its dictatorships, the specter of P2 remains a cautionary tale. A reminder that democracy can be subverted not only by domestic actors, but also by transnational conspiracies operating under the cloak of brotherhood, secrecy, and power. In conclusion, the alleged involvement of P2 in Latin America underscores how Cold War paranoia bred unholy alliances between military regimes, intelligence agencies, religious authorities, and secret societies. Licio Gelli's Masonic Lodge functioned not merely as an ideological club, but as an operational hub for far-right coordination on a global scale. Its actions in Latin America, whether facilitating coups, laundering money, or supporting repression, were deeply aligned with its core objective, the establishment of a new authoritarian order protected by secrecy and bound by loyalty. In the end, the story of P2 in Latin America is not just about conspiracy, but about the very real and devastating consequences of unchecked clandestine power.